Welcome, everyone. We've got a jam-packed session today, so we're going to get started as soon as possible. There are still some people coming in, so we won't get into the meat of it immediately. But thanks very much for joining us for today's public webinar from the CLARE program. The title today is Moving Towards Transformational Adaptation, and we're going to be sharing insights from CLARE on how to enable transformational adaptation. Go to the next slide, please. If you would like to follow this meeting with live captions translated into a different language than English, which most of the session will be in, you can do that by going to the More button at the bottom of your screen on the little toolbar that's at the bottom there. You can select the captions option, and then once you have saying Show Captions, you will then get a new button at the bottom. Click on that with the little arrow on the side, and you can click on the preferred language that you would like to follow in. I hope that everyone can find what they would prefer to follow this particular webinar on. There's quite a long list of languages there available to you. So today is, as I said, about transformational adaptation, but just to let you know that we have a series of webinars. This may be the first one you're attending. It may be, we've had 4 so far already, so this is the 5th in the series. We're planning for at least 2 more, but potentially a few extras will be added towards the end of the year. So if you would like to join us in September, we'll be discussing centering the lived realities of those most impacted by climate change. And in October, we'll be discussing adaptation in action, visual storytelling for impact. We'll be launching a CLARE Climate Visuals partnership where they've done a photo essay campaign with many of our CLARE projects, which is really great to see. I will just give everyone a moment to digest what's on there, but I think in the meantime, I can just say that for those of you who haven't heard of CLARE, CLARE is a framework research program on climate adaptation and resilience. We're working to enable socially inclusive and sustainable action to build resilience to climate change and natural hazards in Africa and the Asia Pacific region. CLARE is jointly designed and run by the United Kingdom's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and Canada's International Development Research Centre. I'm going to ask, we can play a short video about CLARE, it's just half a minute in a few moments, but I'll just quickly run you through the agenda before we do that. So I've just been letting you know a bit about CLARE, and there's a short video. We'll then have a scene setter presentation from Sonwabile Lugogo, who's in my team at the Research for Impact Hub at South South North. Then we'll have a series of 3 quickfire presentations from 3 different projects within the CLARE family. We'll have Sylvia sharing from the Reurbanize project, Tiaz sharing from the Climate Reefs project, and Susan sharing from WASFA. That will be followed by a panel discussion where we'll have 3 additional projects sharing insights. We have Gina Ziafogel from Tua Pamoja, Arna Toa from the Benin Health Project, and Kate Gannon from Basin. And that discussion will be moderated by Biplav, and he's with the Capacity Strengthening Hub of CLARE. And then we'll have a very quick closing of this very packed agenda. So I'm just going to hand over to the short video, and then Sonwabile will take us through the scene setter. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Susan. Hello, everyone. As Susan has mentioned, I'm Sonwabile Lugogo. I work at the Research for Impact Hub. So my presentation it will be based on the working paper that we are developing as the Research for Impact Hub. So the data for this paper was collected during the CLARE exchange event, which took place in Zambia, which was attended by various stakeholders, including including CLARE project representatives. So this was followed up by several engagements which took place between us, the Research for Impact Hub, and other CLARE projects. So through these discussions and engagements with the CLARE projects, they identified what they perceived as the key enablers and barriers to achieving transformational adaptation. So this presentation will highlight these enablers and barriers, and demonstrate how CLARE projects are supporting and enabling transformational adaptation. So to try and demonstrate this, so I will highlight how CLARE projects align their work or their activities with the 6 dimensions of transformational adaptation, which are as identified by the UNFCCC. So this is just to showcase how we see CLARE as contributing to transformational adaptation. Next slide, please. Oh, thanks, Jamie. Okay, so these are the enablers that I'm talking about and the barriers. So on the enablers side, so transformational adaptation is mostly successful when it targets a systemic and structural change rather than just focusing on short-term fixes. So it also needs to promote social justice and inclusion. This ensures that the vulnerable groups are not left behind. So another important enabler is the ability to shift the mindset and behaviors. So transformational change, it requires people, institutions, and communities to think and act differently. So this can also be strengthened by community-led and participatory approaches where local stakeholders are actively involved in decision making. So other enablers include innovation, learning, and sustainability. These are also critical enablers of transformational adaptation. So I won't go into too much detail on that. Despite having these enablers, there are barriers that can limit transformational adaptation. For example, power dynamics and governance challenges, which often influence who benefits from adaptation efforts. So also the cultural and social norms may also delay adaptation of new practices and behaviors. In addition to that, limited financial, technical, human resources can also restrict the implementation of implementation. So also measuring transformational change is also another challenge. Because impacts are often long and then it is difficult to actually attribute directly to specific interventions. So also the challenges with communication, coordination challenges, and then the competing stakeholder interests can also create some obstacle in achieving or enabling transformational adaptations. Next slide, please, Jamie. So I will go through these 6 dimensions of transformational adaptation, which are adapted from UNFCCC and tried and showcase how CLARE projects are aligning their work with them in order to support transformational adaptation. Next slide, please, Jamie. So the first dimension is the depth of deliberate change. So CLARE projects are challenging existing governance arrangements, social norms, and decision-making processes and power structures that shape climate risks. So the projects are working towards trying to reduce power an agency. For example, Inex project, which is implemented in South Africa and Mozambique, is involving informal settlements, residents as co-producers of risk, and some of the projects are challenging exclusionary social norms. So, in order to transform gender, social, and institutional norms which exist within our societies, and some of the projects are trying to transform our governance systems in order to change how adaptation decisions are made. Next slide, please, Jeremy. So the next dimension is scope and scale of change. So most of the CLARE projects operate through multi-level governance approaches that connect communities, local governments, national institutions, and regional actors. So the projects are aiming to promote cross-scale governance in order to bridge community and policy scales. Some of the projects are working towards improving cross-sector integration. For example, Benin Health, which is implemented in Benin, is integrating climate adaptation with the health sector, and this is also done by WOSFA and Clarity. which they are integrating the climate adaptation into to agricultural sector and also fisheries in climate done by climate reefs. So and another some projects are also trying to strengthen cross-border and regional collaboration. So this is evident from a PASAGE project which is implemented in East Africa, whereby they bring in together different stakeholders from different countries. Next slide, please, Jamie. So another dimension is the speed of change. So CLARE is accelerating the transition from crisis responses to anticipatory action. So the projects are doing this by improving our early warning systems in order to improve to to for early action interventions to be taken. So some of the projects are also working on providing real-time decision support in order to convert information into actionable tools. And one of the key strengths of the CLARE program is the emphasis which is put on co-production. So when you're co-producing with the local stakeholders, there's a chance for faster uptake of the interventions and the solutions. Next slide, please. So another dimension is the limits to change. So CLARE project recognizes that climate vulnerability is produced by deeper structural conditions rather than just isolated climate hazards. So in order to address this, the CLARE projects are trying to address social inequality. So this is evidence from WUSWA project, which is implemented in Uganda, where the focus is on addressing gender inequality. And then some of the projects are trying to address governance failures. For instance, PASAGE, which I've already mentioned, is also trying to address weak cross-border coordination between different countries in East Africa. And some of the projects are trying to change the narrative and address policy constraints. So this is evident from a success project which is implemented in Asia, which challenges the negative migration narrative. So the project is trying to advocate for migration to be seen as an adaptation strategy rather than a negative thing. Next slide, please, Jamie. So another dimension is adaptive sustainability. So in order to be sustainable, the CLARE projects are prioritizing long-term sustainability through institutionalization and building capacity, and then trying to encourage local ownership. So they are doing this by embedding tools within existing institutions. For example, SafeWeather is embedding its work in in Asia within national agencies. This will ensure that the work of the project does not become obsolete after the project closure. The national agencies can continue with that work. So some of the projects are also building the capacity of the local stakeholders. For example, this is done by Palm Trees, whereby they are working with the village savings loans association groups. And then some of the projects are developing sustainable livelihood systems. So this is evident from BIMA project, which is trying to promote insurance product for vulnerable groups like livestock owners and particularly women farmers. Next slide, please, Jamie. Next slide. Okay. So this is the last dimension. In order to be relevant to the context and the needs of the beneficiaries, the CLARE projects are built on co-production of knowledge. So they recognize that local communities are the key holders of knowledge. So the projects are working with the local communities and the local institutions. So there's also a use of participatory assessment approaches like photo voice, participatory risk assessment, co-creation lab to ensure that everyone's voice is heard and then everyone is involved in decision making in the project from inception up to implementation. So also, the solutions are locally tailored, so the projects are building on existing and coping practices and institutions rather than just imposing external models. For example, this is done by Inecta in Durban and in Mozambique, whereby they are using these community flood warning systems, which are community led. So I think that's where my presentation will end for now. But this will what I've just discussed now will be discussing the paper that we are working on. So now as I will hand over to Sylvia to present. You can go ahead, Sylvia.
Yeah. Who's handling the slides? Jamie? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I can't see them on my screen. Anyway, a good day to all. I'm Sylvia Miklat from the Philippines, where we are now literally drenched by the southwest monsoon rains for nearly 3 weeks. Massive flooding in many places, especially low-lying ones. Anyway, I'm speaking for Project Urbanize. It's a CLARE initiative that is accompanying an ongoing adaptation pathway for 7 communities in different parts of the Philippines. These are communities that began their climate adaptation process after surviving the impact of extreme climate events in the past, mostly from flooding in urban waterways and the resulting garbage slides, landslides experienced in their original settlement sites. They collected themselves together as a homeless people's federation of around nearly 100 community associations. They put together a microcredit savings scheme. They bought lands to settle in and ensure a continuing livelihood. Leadership roles are mostly held by women. But the story does not stop there, as most of these communities, organized and called as HOAs, or homeowners associations, are able to afford lands that are usually prone to hazards of flooding and landslides. For some, government allocated housing lands that are deltas, floodplains, or located near waterways. Building back better and safer homes and communities that ensure livelihoods and access to social services remains a continuing aspiration for transformational adaptation. Next slide, please. The Urbanize project is a consortium of 6 multi-sectoral partners with a collective effort to strengthen effective responses for climate adaptation and resilience that acknowledge the life experiences of and capacities of those living in informal settlements in a changing context of urbanization. Focused on 7 communities with around 1,200 households or nearly 5,000 people living in areas with mostly flooding and landslide hazards, the Urbanize project partnered with communities at the onset and co-developed the project design and activities that enable a strengthened adaptation, one that responds to their context and urgent aspiration for change. Thus, community transformational adaptation is an integral component of the entire process. Next slide, please. These are the major activities undertaken in each site. Results fed the adaptation plans, community vulnerability and capacity assessments, participatory risk assessments, and the household survey on differential vulnerability to climate-related hazards. There are also local and national policy reviews and case studies and research papers on urbanization and differential vulnerability. Next slide, please. Urbanize has 4 work packages that directed the adaptation process of assessing, planning, implementing, and monitoring. The relevance to community contexts of marginalization, vulnerability, and exposure are understood with the community at the onset. Local policies are reviewed with community with inputs from local government if possible to explore where shifts or adjustments are needed, as well as attitude change. With scale and sustainability in sight, practical community action projects that respond to community concerns are identified and negotiated for partnerships with assisting organizations and with local government programs. Next slide, please. As Urbanize wraps up its activities this year, the Community's Adaptation Planning, or the HOA Adaptation Plan as they call it, started in December 2025 and was recently completed in a process that started from the communities at the grassroots, brought to their regional clusters, and to the National Federation in a national strategic plan that incorporates the results from Urbanize research activities for implementation from 2026 to 2030. At the local level, community action plans relate to the overall goal, while responding to their local needs and concerns and are the community's ways forward. Next slide, please. The HOA Adaptation Plan Framework puts community concerns and priorities as the basis for action, validated and affirmed by consolidated research results. Next slide, please. Community activities allow for engaged participation while discussing research results, sharing climate information, DRR, and climate change adaptation efforts at the local and national levels. Community members also share their lived experience of the impact of hazards. Next slide, please. Locally led adaptation plans are identified emerging from their priorities and concerns, allowing communities to review also their plans for both short-term and long-term periods. Next slide, please. These are the 7 small-scale action projects identified. You can see some of these are on better drainage, waste management, learning exchange visits across communities, some startup capital for livelihood, among others. The support organizations and local government assistance are also identified, so where this can connect, no? Last slide, please. So the key insights gained from the Urbanized project that accompany the community adaptation process include the co-development of the project proposal with research partners, the conduct of iterative reviews and updating of local community situations in relation to hazard, co-learning with other homeowner associations through exchanges and visits, bottom-up adaptation planning towards a federation-wide national strategic plan, flexibility of processes that adjusted to community contexts and situations, and the core integration of DRR-CCA, disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation lens in strategic planning, which wasn't there before. So in summary, the significant value of the urbanized intervention is in advancing the community's adaptation plans and actions and strengthening their institutional processes as a federation with regional and local chapters. In a context where these community voices are shunned and sometimes ignored, except for political expediency, the development of locally led adaptation plans gives them the tools that help them strengthen their community voices and resilience and build their confidence to negotiate for better government response and budgets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. I don't know whether everyone has seen the comment that was from that was made by Susan, whereby the audience can ask the speakers questions which they can upload on the Q&A, and then because we have allocated 4 minutes for that. So I don't see any questions. Are there any questions, Jamie? I don't see any questions from the. So I think let's move on to the next presentation. We can go ahead, yes.
Yes, thank you. Good day, everyone. My name is Tias. I'm here on behalf of all people from Climate Risk Project. And today I would like to share our work on empowering women for adaptation and resilience. Next slide, please. So Climate Reefs is a multidisciplinary project working in Indonesia and the Philippines. We brings together 4 perspectives such as ecological, genomic, geospatial, social, and institutional research. This matters because core reef resilience is not only about the conditions of reefs or fish populations, it is also about people, institutions, livelihoods, and the decision communities are able to make. These combinations of research aim to pilot an analysis that tests the interplay of adaptiveness from genes to people. However, my presentation today focuses mainly on the social part. Next slide, please. So before going further, let me briefly explain what we mean by transformational adaptations. Coping helps people survive immediate problems. Incremental adaptation helps them make adjustment while largely keeping the same system. Transformation goes deeper. It changes the condition that produce vulnerability in the first place, including unequal access to resources, limited decision-making power, and institutions that exclude certain groups. So transformation is not simply doing more adaptations, it is changing who benefits, who participates, and who has power. Next slide. So where does this story begins? It begins by listening to how coastal community experience climate change and by asking who carries the burden of responding to it. Next slide, please. For the first 6 months of the project, we conducted a literature review study. Across the responses, we reviewed that extreme weather and extreme wave were among the most frequently reported threats across Indonesia and the Philippines. Communities are already responding, and many try to generate supplemental income or develop alternative sources of livelihood. This tells us two things. First, climate impacts are already part of everyday life. Second, people are not passive, they are adapting with the option available to them. But those options are often limited and they are not equally available to everyone. If you are interested to read more, you can scan the barcode of our preprint publication. Next slide, please. So we conducted gender analysis from 3,165 household survey data. The qualitative analysis shows that women and men contribute to adaptation in different but connected ways. Women are strongly involved in livelihood diversification, food processing, small trade, saving groups, household management. They often carry both productive work and unpaid reproductive responsibility. In simple terms, women often do more but decide less. Men are more associated with fishing activities, both engineer, repair, and physically demanding collective work. They may have a greater decision-making power, but their adaptation is often more episodic. Importantly, fishfold association and saving groups provide collective resilience for both women and men. Next slide, please. The quantitative results reinforce this study. From the coefficient plot of regression model, we can see livelihood diversity was positively associated with the ability to make ends meet or basic need, while being negatively associated with income. So simply encouraging women to diversify livelihoods may not be enough. The intervention needs to consider the quality, profitability, stability, and accessibility of those livelihoods opportunities, not just the number of activities women undertake. Otherwise, diversification can improve day-to-day coping without transforming the underlying economic inequality. We then tested pathways linking gender to adaptive capacity using Climate Change Vulnerability and Adaptation Score, or CCVA. Trust, gender diversity, livelihood diversity, community empowerment were considered. Community empowerment emerged as the strongest pathway. In practical terms, women's lower empowerment substantially reduced their adaptive capacity. Once empowerment is considered, little of the gender difference remains. This suggests that closing the empowerment gap could close much of the adaptation gap. Next slide, please. So all these scientific findings led us to focus on one group that is often active in adaptation, but still marginalized in decisions, in this case, women. We did not want the research to end with the diagnosis. We want to translate the evidence into practical support and into tools communities could use. We're also currently working in developing Think Kit for climate adaptation in coastal communities. This is work in progress. We gather many information from local community stories, partner, and stakeholder experiences. Next slide. So Climate Reefs approaches transformational adaptation as a pathway. Our intervention therefore combines three connected areas. First, food diversification and financial training help women create value from fish product, manage income, and build savings. Second, packaging and marketing training help them reach customer and develop viable products. Third, digital climate storytelling and leadership training help women communicate their experiences, build confidence, and take part in community discussion. These activities are not transformational on their own. They become pathway toward transformation when they are strengthened both economic agency and collective voices. Next slide. Before the training, we design outcomes that we aim and set of indicator of how to measure them. We measure short-term changes across 6 outcomes. These include new process skills, stronger financial management, greater confidence in public communication, a co-created climate leadership thinking, more diverse income sources and market channels, and policy learning share through regional platforms. This is important because counting attendance is not enough. We need to know whether women are using these new skills, keeping financial reports, entering new market, facilitating discussion, and bringing their voices into policy. Next slide, please. We then conducted baseline assessment and analyzed results. The baseline was conducted before the training, and the end line will be conducted hopefully by the end of this month. So this is work in progress. Our baseline analysis shows why this support is needed. Many participants have low or uncertain household income while also supporting several dependents. When households face pressure, the most common responses is borrowing money. Others sell small food products, reduce household expenses, or even ask relatives for help. This strategy demonstrates creativity, but money are coping responses rather than lasting solutions. Next slide, please. The baseline also shows an interesting contrast. Many women already take leadership roles within their families and see themselves as climate leaders. However, accessing to market is extremely limited, and confidence in leading others is still uneven. These are critical points for improvement. The issue is therefore not a lack of ability or motivation. It is the gap between women's existing contribution and opportunities, recognitions, networks, and decision-making space available to them. Next slide. This participant reflection captured the kind of change we hope to support. Through the training, they learn how to manage money, process fish, and think about developing their own business. This is more than learning a recipe. It is a shift from being limited to selling a raw product toward having greater control over production, income, and future choices. From this, we learned that several social and institutional transformation enablers that is critical includes participation, leadership, women empowerment, community organization, and wider networks. Finally, next slide, please. Finally, we come up with this reflection that adaptation becomes transformational only when it advances equity and leaves no one behind. For women in coastal communities, this means more than inviting them to attend a training or a consultation. It means strengthening their control over resources, recognizing their works, expanding their decision-making power, and ensuring that institutions respond to their priorities. Equity is not an additional benefit of adaptation. It is a condition for transformation. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tias. I still see no questions, so I think let's continue with our presentation. So you can go ahead, Suzanne, with your presentation.
Thank you, Sanwabire, and good day, everyone. I'm here to present preliminary findings for the WUSFA project. And the WUSFA project is focusing on building women smallholder farmers' resilience and empowerment to climate change. Next slide, please. The problem that we are addressing is a gender problem, and it is because women are less adaptive to climate change than men. And this is particularly caused by their low levels of agency, with the limited participation in household decision-making, restricted mobility, but also limited access to productive assets, such as land, training, and credit. But also in Uganda, the society is highly patriarchal, where the social norms encourage men-dominant roles. Next slide, please. In terms of context, this project is implemented in Uganda. Uganda is in East Africa, Sub-Saharan region, and in particular, we implemented the project in 2 districts that are along the cattle corridor. One of the districts, Katakwi, is found in the mid-eastern region of the country, and Liantonde district is found in the central region. The project targets 752 women smallholder farmers and their spouses, and therefore in total we have 1,504 project beneficiaries. Next slide, please. Our approach started off by stakeholder mapping the stakeholders at national level and district level. This was intended to introduce the project to key stakeholders, but also solicit their views and ideas on our project design, as well as refining our project implementation strategy. And then, given that it is an ICT, we implemented a baseline survey in 2023, towards the end of 2023, to collect key information on our key parameters that we want to evaluate. After the baseline survey, we implemented the intervention phase, where we implemented our treatments early 2024, which was followed by a monitoring and evaluation activities. And here we basically monitored changes in our key parameters of interest. And we also conducted a midline survey, although it mainly focused on the qualitative evaluation. And recently we concluded our endline survey because we're moving towards the end of the project. And the endline survey, we want to see what has changed since our implementation of the intervention. Next slide, please. Definition of our interventions is that in each of those 2 districts, we have a control site where we did nothing. And then we had 2 treatments. The first treatment is training in GALS. GALS is Gender Action Learning Systems, and also CSA, which is Climate Smart Agriculture. We trained our project beneficiaries in those 2 key areas, but also we included a mentorship program where we aimed to ensure that the project beneficiaries who are trained would be able to apply the knowledge they acquired in the training. The second treatment, we provided access to weather information and agricultural advisories so that they have more access to weather information. Initially, we provided these messages through SMS, but we realized that beneficiaries had low levels of education and digital education, so they had some bit of digital illiteracy, and we had to change to voice messages, which we realized during the monitoring and evaluation exercise. Then the combination site, we implemented the 2 treatments in the combination site, and the interventions were at sub-county level in the 2 districts. Next slide, please. Yeah, so far we have registered some behavior change, and we observed this during the midline, as I mentioned earlier. And behavior changes in our 2 major dimensions of change. Recall I mentioned at the beginning that this project is looking at empowerment and resilience. So in the area of empowerment, we realized that the girls' training encouraged women's participation in family decisions, self-efficacy, change their attitudes towards domestic violence, increase their physical mobility, improved work balance, and control over use of income. So we have realized that there's been an enhancement in their level of agency. A few voices I highlight here from the 2 districts. First, the Liantonde district, from the focus group discussion, we have this quote: "Women have more confidence to discuss household responsibilities and work sharing with their households. I have more confidence to speak about sharing work in our household because girls open our minds to share chores and farm work." To us, this is a major achievement. As I mentioned earlier at the beginning, that it is a highly patriarchal society where there is dominant main roles, and in our societies, it is unusual to see a man involved in household chores. So, but during the girls' training, we taught them to balance gender roles, to balance these household responsibilities. And some of the households have adjusted and changed, and many of the women are very happy because of the reduced burden of these household chores. And the second quote is from the second district, that is Katakwi district, and this is from a key informant interview of one of the local leaders. SAS stands for Senior Administrative Secretary. These are local leaders at sub-county level, and we worked with extension workers on our program, and one of the extension workers reported that then I also have witnessed that women are no longer burdened with a lot of work. Men are helping them with chores at home. Men now help them fetch water from the borehole and work together with their women. Men are the ones now collecting firewood for their wives. That one I've witnessed myself at the household I visited. I remember I mentioned at the beginning that the training had a mentorship component. So as we worked with these local leaders, they noticed these behavior changes which they reported, which was not the case before. So we've seen a bit of change in norms in the beneficiary households that are part of the project. Next slide, please. Now, the second dimension of adaptation to climate change, we've also noticed some behavior change. The training in the climate smart agriculture and increased access to weather information and agricultural advisories improved the planning of farming activities and resulted in higher yields. I mentioned this as one of the treatments that we provided weather information and agricultural advisories. By the way, we gave every woman a smartphone to access this information. And we've noticed a behavior change, and we have a quote from each of those districts from Liantonde, the in-depth interview, and this was a man. He says, "It's for us who got training, we planted backyard vegetable gardens supported by drip irrigation when the drought persisted. We also planted small gardens which we irrigated using watering cans. That helped us to have some food during the dry season as others were patiently waiting for rain. We dug ditches, we enabled water flow in the garden and saved the plants from being washed away to flash floods." And so we noticed that because of the training, we trained them in the farming practices they can adopt to enable them, counteract the climate change effects. And we noticed that many of them took up the advice and started implementing it. Drip irrigation, this was uncommon before the project, but now we see several households have adopted drip irrigation, and they have also started planting small gardens in their backyards and also protecting their gardens from these flash floods, which would wash away almost the entire garden, and then the household would have food insecurity. But because of improved farming practices, there are more yields, and therefore the households are more food secure. Then in Katakwi, the voice from a male in the focus group discussion says that these phones have helped us because we don't do farming anyhow again. You waste your seeds. Now we follow the rain patterns of climate changes in the fawn. Now we know that it's going to rain and we grow crops. Now in the intervention of the provision of weather information, we would provide them with messages warning them on when it is going to rain, what they need to do at a particular time. So we have noticed a behavior change that now they make farming decisions from an informed point of view. So they use the information we provide them regarding the changes in weather patterns, and also we advise them on how to conduct their agricultural activities. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of limitations, just to flash out a few limitations that we faced as a project, first of all, the deep-rooted social norms. Now, these ones require ample time. Change, transformational change cannot take place in a very short time. It requires ample time. And we realized that much as most of the households were willing to change, some needed more time to change. And some men or husbands were denying their wives to use the phones because they needed more time to change their mindset and social norms. Then also limited household resources, poverty. Some of the households struggled to put into practice the CSA technologies and practices because of lack of money to purchase some of the required inputs. Then illiteracy was also a challenge, and some of especially the women, had low levels of education. And recall, the phone was given to the woman, and so that is why we had to change our messages from SMS, because SMS, you're required to read the message. And some of these women couldn't read even the local language. And so we had to use a voice message so that the message reaches them and they are able to use the information and make informed decisions on their farming activities. The other challenge was water scarcity. In some households, they were struggling. They're not harvesting water. The water source is far, a kilometer away. And so irrigation was difficult for some of the households or even impossible. But they had to adopt other CSA technologies. And lastly, promoting transformational change requires ample time, more time. And even the mentorship required a lot of time to ensure that there is a mindset change that is transformational, that is more permanent and not temporal, so that these households can change the mindset, especially given that we are dealing with a gender problem that is mainly affected by social norms. And we needed time to continue mentoring them so that they can change the power balance in the homes and work balance as well as adopting the CSA technologies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Susan. So we have two questions. One is addressed to you, Susan, and then the other one is addressed to Sylvia. I think I will go first. Let me just give you a chance to breathe, Susan. I will first direct the question to Sylvia. Are you still there, Sylvia?
Yes. Where is the question?
The question is do you see disaster risk reduction discussions related to related topics being prioritized in the community discussions when they set the agenda themselves?
Yes, it is part. It is part of their because that's their context. That's where they live in, and it's really part of their concern. And the whole adaptation is in relation to, especially, their safety and their shelter during these times, and the response that's expected also from government and other assisting organizations.
Okay.
Where is that?
Sylvia?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, to you, Susan. So was there any training or I think intentions?
Yeah, I've seen the question. This was a challenge, and I think I mentioned it. Yes, remember our training was on one of our treatment was on training. We trained these women and together with their spouses in the gender action learning systems or gender transformation approaches. And in particular, we trained them on identifying the gender role challenges in the households and also how to address them. And then the weather information, we are providing this information through SMS. And I mentioned that during our monitoring and evaluation exercise, we realized that due to low levels of literacy, some of the women were not able to read the messages. They had to ask either their husbands or their children who are educated to read for them. And sometimes there would be a time lag, in which they would access the information and also use it. So we quickly changed to using a voice call or voice message. We worked with extension workers, the agriculture officers in particular, and they would design the message in the local language, and somebody gets a call, and over the other side, the agriculture officer is speaking and saying it is going to rain in the morning, or it is going to rain in the afternoon, or it is going to remain tomorrow morning. Therefore, please prepare your gardens to plant. And so that is how we're able to address that challenge of low levels of education and digital literacy.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Susan. I see there are some questions that are coming in, but I will just hold on the questions for now, and because in the interest of time. So I will now pass over to, if we have time to go back to them, we can always come back. But now let's pass over to Biplav, who's going to take us through the panel discussion.
Thanks very much, Somnavile. Hi, everyone. My name is Biplav. I'm from the Capacity Strengthening Hub, also known as a CS Hub. I will be moderating this panel discussion today on supporting transformational adaptation. I hope I'm audible. So as you can see on the screen, we have 3 panel members. Please allow me to quickly introduce them. We have Zina Zervogel, who is a professor in the Department of Environmental and Geographical Science at the University of Cape Town. She's also the co-PI of TUI Pamoza project. Also, we have with us today Arnaud Soha from Benin Health Project, who is a postdoc fellow at the University of Abomey Calavi, Benin. He also serves as a project manager and Research for Impact co-lead for the Benin Health Project. And finally, we have Kate Gannon from the Basin Project, who is assistant professor in climate change adaptation and sustainable development at the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Kate is also a co-PI of the Basin Project. So now with the introduction, so this panel discussion is intended to complement the discussion we have had so far, starting from the presentation from Sonmabile, followed by 3 presentations from 3 different colleagues to 3 different projects. So in this panel discussion, we're trying to identify some practical tools, strategies, and institutional entry points that can support transformational adaptation. So my questions will sort of touch upon some of the 6 dimensions of transformational adaptation Sonmabile initially presented. I will have 1 question each for each of the panel members here. But given that these projects have not been introduced before, because you had 3 rapid fire presentations before and there were different projects, and now we have 3 sets of projects. So I'll also ask our panel members to briefly introduce their project in terms of what is it about and where these projects are implemented when they respond to the questions I've been asked. While I'm going to ask these questions to the panel members, I also want to request our audience to pose questions on the Q&A box as a follow-up question when our panel members respond to my initial question. So my question is just a conversation starter, but we'll let the conversation flow based on the questions received on the Q&A box. I want to start with Arnaud Soha from the Benin Project. Benin is an acronym, but let me give you a brief overview before Arnaud comes in to share more details. It's the early warning and response for climate-sensitive waterborne diseases outbreaks in Benin. It's a Benin Health Project where researchers are working in densely populated areas, open air market in Contounou, and communities living around Lake Noku that are vulnerable to increased flooding, rainwater runoff, lake salination, and other changes to the water stream. This is a very brief overview, but I'll let Arnaud to respond to provide more info about the project while he responds to my question. So as a conversation starter, let me go ahead with my questions. So while implementing your project, Arnaud, Benin Health, your project, what windows of opportunity were you able to identify in the policy space that has potential to support transformational adaptations. Over to you, Arno.
Thank you, Biplav, for the floor you gave to me. Good evening, everyone. We identified several windows in our contest. To start, the clearest was public health surveillance. We showed that legon temperature and salinity can predict diarrheal outbreak 2 to 3 months in advance, which gave the Benin Ministry of Health a concrete indicator it could act on. We also connected naturally with climate and environment policy, with the National IMA and One Health agenda through our sister project, the other one project, and with municipal preparedness mechanic in Soava and Cotonou. It is in the southern part of the country. We walked through this window deliberately with a policy engagement workshop and validating our community innovation directly with local authorities. If I'm very honest, we spotted some of these window a bit late. Engaging policy after earlier would have accelerated uptick. I will finish with 2 bullet points to say that we identify opportunity in existing national system for integrating climate information into health surveillance and early warning systems mechanics, particularly around climate-sensitive disease and such a diarrheal disease. And at the end, I will say that the project also benefit from the growing policy attention to climate change, disaster risk reduction, and One Health and community-based surveillance in Benin. So there's existing policy direction provide a foundation for institutionalizing and scaling the early warning approach beyond our project, the Benin Health Project. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Arno, for sharing your experience from your project. It was very useful to know the timing component when it comes to the windows of opportunity. I think timing matters a lot. In addition to understanding who are the stakeholders in that space, when to engage with, and who are the potential actors to engage in that window of opportunity. So thanks very much, Arno. Now let me go to another panel member to continue the conversation. So next panel member I'm going to ask a question is Gina, who comes from TUI Pamoza project. So the full name of this project is Let's Be Together for Equitable Urban Nature-Based Solutions for Climate Change Adaptation. A very brief overview before I ask a question. This project brings together different stakeholders, including informal settlement residents, NGOs, city officials, and academics from 4 African cities, Accra, Cape Town, Lusaka, and Nairobi, to enhance their capacity to collaboratively design and implement nature-based solutions. With this backdrop, my question to Gina is on partnerships. So the question is, what partnership do you think are essential for driving transformational adaptation that has been built by TUI Pamoza? Over to you, Gina.
Thank you. So yes, you gave a good overview of the project. So just to kind of recap from the partnership lens, because we're working in informal settlements in these 4 cities across Africa, it's very important to understand what the dynamics of engaging in informal settlements might be. And of course, we know that residents living in these contexts understand their context best, but we also know that local government provides services often, but in informal settlements, this can be contested, often because of land and other reasons. So one of the things I'd say that has really come out from the TUI Pamoja project is something that we are calling power-sensitive partnerships in terms of what we need for transformative adaptation. And so for us, power-sensitive partnerships are where we are partnering with groups that might be seen as groups from informal settlements or from NGOs or from academia or from local government, where you actually surface some of the power dimensions. And this really links back to some of the issues that Sonwabo was pointing out earlier in terms of the enablers. And I've really enjoyed the presentations this morning to kind of unpack some of those. And so when we talk about power-sensitive partnerships, we're saying that we don't just want something that's decided and is what's then seen as sort of consultation, but equally, it's not about just co-production where things have been decided and now you bring people in to say, well, what might happen here? And the original actors take it forward. So how do you actually work together in partnership that surfaces some of the power dynamics because of our histories and complexity over resource access, etc.? And so one of the things for us that's really important for transformative adaptation is ideas of justice. And we know that procedural justice is important. And so procedural justice is really bringing in multiple voices. But if you can bring those in a way that the actors really feel their voice is heard and can lead to an outcome that addresses distributive justice, we feel that is key to transformative adaptation. So in the context of our work on nature-based solutions in informal settlements, we don't just want people living in informal settlements to have a voice as to what they think should happen, but we want to see a change in the impacts of climate and how that might be experienced. So, for example, we had an engagement in Cape Town where we were looking at flood risk in an informal settlement. And through a very productive workshop, the residents from the settlement could show in this collaborative workshop with city officials and academics what the priorities were on a map. But it was when we went to the settlement that they could then show us what the trade-offs have been and how some people couldn't live in some areas and others. So distributive justice would be around, well, making sure that that river that runs through is actually carefully considered in terms of maybe nature-based solutions, as well as some grey infrastructure to make sure that they are not as flooded in the future. It needs to be based on their experience and the dynamics of that settlement that can only really be taken forward through a partnership that brings in different partners rather than an external person saying what should happen.
Thanks very much, Zina. Really interesting insight on this power-sensitive partnership. So we spent a bit of a time talking about partnership when it comes to Pomosa, and you, as you heard, the power dynamics at play in informal settlements, understanding that context is very crucial to this kind of partnership in these informal settlements. So I'll also request our audience to ask any follow-up questions you may have to Gina, in addition to Arnaud. So we'll circle back on that in a bit. So let me move ahead with our another panel member, who is Kate from Basin. So Basin also has a full form, so to speak, the Behavioral Adaptation for Water Security and Inclusion. This project applies ideas and techniques from psychology and behavioral science to identify the structural, psychological, and systemic factors influencing water security behaviors in Tanzania, Burkina Faso, and Malawi. Very short introduction to the Basin Project. Let me move on to asking a question to Kate. It's about sustainability, which also Sonwabile raised in one of the 6 dimensions. So my question to Kate is, at what level is the project engaging existing policy to ensure that transformation brought by its implementation can be sustained in the future? Kate, over to you.
Thank you, Biplav, and hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation today. So when we're talking about transformation as long-term systemic change, I'd say Basin has taken a 3-pronged approach. So first, we focused on just really understanding the system and where change is needed. And then we've focused on identifying possible levers for change within that system. And third, we focused on working with the actors who are actually positioned to influence that change. So because, as you said, Basin is focused on behaviour, that's meant asking whose behaviour needs to change, how might we influence that behaviour, and who is well positioned to influence that behaviour. And when we ask that first question about where change is needed, we often find that the answer takes us towards policy and the behaviours and decisions of policymakers. And this realization has actually required quite some methodological innovation within Basin, because behavioral research has traditionally focused on behaviors at the individual level, things like getting people to wash their hands, with much less attention given to the behaviors and decisions that shape policy outcomes. So through Basin, we've developed a new methodology called a multi-actor behavior journey. And essentially, it allows us to look at a complex policy process involving many different actors and identify where a desired adaptation outcome is breaking down, why it's breaking down, and specifically where there may be realistic opportunities to intervene within the system to try and redress that. And, this method could and can be applied to analyse policy decisions at all levels. We've applied it to look at adaptation implementation gaps in national government budgeting processes. And so far, we've focused on Tanzania and Malawi for this. So these are both countries that have high-level policy frameworks that recognise the importance of flood and drought preparedness, but where we're just not seeing this translated into action, but specifically national budgets. So we've been examining where in the national budgeting process preparedness gets lost, which actors and decisions matter, and how different actors, particularly our Basin NGO partners, may be able to influence those decisions to change the system outcome. And just to go back to the NGO partners and the question that you asked about how change can be sustained in the future. So we've been very conscious that, true systems change is a big and often unrealistic ask within short project timelines. So our approach has been, all our research was co-designed with NGO partners to embed it very fundamentally within their existing priorities, programs, and ultimately so it can go on to continue informing the work that they were already doing, including their ongoing engagement with policy processes. And just a kind of point of reflection for the CLARE programme is, this really meant investing quite heavily at the beginning of Basin in understanding the problems that our partners were trying to address and to jointly identifying and co-designing where behavioural research could add value. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Kate, for shedding light on the sustainability aspect. I think this is a question probably most of the CLARE projects are asking themselves. How do we sustain the efforts we made over the couple of years as we come to the end of the project cycle? So very important insights on the system level understanding, whose behavior needs to change, what barriers exist in terms of continuing the momentum, in the long term, and understanding the landscape there in terms of getting buy-in, embedding in the existing or ongoing processes, so it continues over a long period. So we've touched upon the sustainability question with Kate from Basin. Before we touched on the question of partnership with Gina from TUI Pomosa, and in the beginning we discussed the windows of opportunity in the policy space with Arnaud. So these were some specific questions to these projects, but now I'm going to move on to some general questions. But I think if we have time, I'm gonna go back to these questions to ask panel members who have not answered the question that was asked to one particular panel member. But let me go ahead with some general questions. The first question is on the policy landscape at the national and international level, also connecting with the enablers that Sonmavile mentioned in the beginning. So the question I'm going to ask to all of you one by one. I would expect a very short answer because I have multiple questions in this general question segment. So my question is, so maybe let me ask who I'm going to ask first. So let me go ahead with Gina.
So can I just intervene, because they asked us which of these three because of time. So I think we've spread them across. So I said I'd answer the one and the last one on ships.
Yeah, please.
So I'm not sure if somebody else wanted to answer the international climate policy one rather.
Sure. Let me do that because we have some time left. So let me ask a question and then whoever wants to answer that question, please unmute your mic. So let me go ahead with the question. So how can national and international climate policy better support countries, researchers, and communities in implementing transformational adaptation plans? So this question is to everyone, but whoever is comfortable, please unmute your mic and go ahead.
I can have a go, Biflav, thank you. So I'm going to say, I mean, we often actually have pretty good high-level policy. I think the last count I saw was 26 African countries have now formally submitted a NAP, and high-level ambitions to mainstream adaptation into the activities of government are, often pretty clearly stated in national climate policy framework. So I'd say the problem is coming is happening when it comes to implementation. There are lots of well-known reasons for this. They include things like unclear institutional mandates or coordination challenges. And I'll summarize some of it as arising from a lack of specificity in policy, where it's articulating high-level ambitions, but these are just not being accompanied by clear links to delivery mechanisms or monitoring systems. We've seen this in Basin, for example. So looking at the national budgeting processes, NAPs often don't specify any concrete mechanisms for translating these NAP priorities into fiscal planning and budget formulation. And then we're finding budgeting architecture lacks any procedural mechanisms such as budget templates or compliance indicators for prompting structural consideration of adaptation and for making adaptation allocations visible and accessible. And this is meaning that ministries, for example, then have very little in the way of guidance or incentives or structural frameworks to actually prompt or help them budget for adaptation. And I'd say these issues are well known about at a broad level, but research to date has rarely been able to specify kind of precisely what needs to change at which points in a decision sequence to address the specific barriers kind of impacting the actual steps of a policy process. And this has been a focus for us in Basin. It was a motivation for the multi-actor behavior journey methodology I mentioned, but I really feel like this implementation gap needs to be a focus of research going forwards.
Thanks, Kate. Anybody else want to complement this response, or I can go ahead with, let me first quickly check. Let me pause a bit. Let me move ahead with another question. So this is on scaling transformational adaptation. So the question is, what kind of support and actions are needed to accelerate transformational adaptation at scale, and who needs to take that lead? So the question is to everyone, but please, whoever feels comfortable, please unmute your mic and answer this question on scaling transformational adaptation.
I can go again if no one
Yes,
wants to.
please.
Sure. So, I mean, look, this is a huge question, but I think we've got a lot of researchers and NGO representatives who have a strong advocacy role on this webinar. So maybe I'll just speak about where I see our roles in this space. And that's to say, I think we need a lot more monitoring and evaluation and accountability embedding into adaptation governance and policy systems. And so again, just to reference our study, which considered specifically how flood and drought preparedness falls out of national budgeting processes, what we found is people in really key positions with really key responsibilities for translating adaptation policy into budget decisions on paper. In interviews, they often didn't actually recognize their own role in this process, and sometimes even reported a sense of confidence that, someone else in the system was taking care of it. And I feel like the potential for this kind of obfuscation of responsibility, often not intentional, is really compounded by the complexity of adaptation governance systems, which are leaving roles unclear and kind of translating into really poorly designed monitoring and evaluation systems that are too generalized to really hold people to account. And yeah, so I see the role of our research and advocacy community under CLARE as really needing to step up and fill this gap. And maybe, I don't know, since I've got the virtual floor, I just say one other reflection, which is that I think finance ministries are a really under-leveraged area for adaptation work, that truly addresses systems. And these actors are just really key in overseeing which areas of policy ultimately get funded and are therefore actually implemented. And we've seen there's work that shows that finance ministries can be especially receptive to economic arguments for adaptation. And this is actually quite an easy case to argue. So yeah, call to action for us all, but a couple of entry points.
Thanks very much, Kate. Excellent points.
Can I come again?
Yes, please. Arno, go ahead.
Okay, from our side, from the Within Health Project, we think that scaling requires shared leadership most of the time. And we think that communities should lead local ownership and validation. And researchers should translate evidence into practical tools. And for government, we think that they should lead institutionalization and scaling up for any kind of innovation who come out of project implementation. So in our project, community involvement through innovation working group, strengthening ownership of early warning system from our side, and scaling therefore requires sustained investment in community leadership, research capacity, and institutional capacity. And alongside funding, this will bridge the gap between a successful pilot and government adaptation. So it is what I want to add to what your colleague said.
Thanks very much, Arno, for sharing experience from your project, Benin Health, on scaling transformational adaptation. So I have a last question left on my list, and then we move on to the questions posed by the audience. I see multiple questions already coming in, but let me finish from my list first. So my last question is related to barriers to transformational adaptation. So the question is, transformational adaptation requires shifts in institutions, power structures, and development pathways. What are the most difficult trade-offs or barriers that must be addressed in order to make transformational adaptation possible? So please unmute your mic and respond to this question. Over to you.
Sure, I'm happy to come in here. And again, I think this is a huge question. Shifts in institutions, power structures, and development pathways. And I'd agree with all of those. But I just wanted to answer with one thing that makes it quite applied, because I think it can be overwhelming. And I know that one of the things that's come up in Tue Pamoja is really trying to understand engagement with local government. And I've seen this in my work over many years, that there generally is very good intention from local government, and they want to see areas better adapted to climate risk. But the way that local government works and their incentives are often at odds to what, let's say, residents want. And so I think surfacing that and working with that can be a really productive way of saying exactly where are these trade-offs? What is being prioritized by local government? And sometimes it's just that they need to spend money in a budget cycle. And so their priority is to get it spent. Whereas if we're thinking about transformational adaptation and really surfacing whose needs are being met and listened to, it can take more time. There also, of course, are politics of whose voice gets heard, even within informal settlements, of course. So how do we take time for that, build trust, but use the systems where there are resources for implementing change to make sure that the impacts are reduced for those most vulnerable. So I think that's a useful way of looking at it, because you need to look at the institutions, the power that people have, but also what are the development trajectories. And that's one of the most exciting things from TUE, is that we really looked at bottom-up climate resilient development pathways to say, how do we start with the priorities of people in the settlements and then see how those are aligning with local government pathways, rather than trying to fit into local government pathways and not meeting the needs of those at the local level. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Gina. I'm just going to pick up one question, which you already answered in the chat, in the Q&A, but also let me give you an opportunity to expand a bit. The question is from Aryan from IDRC. It's about the power dynamics that are not due to climate impacts, but how do we deal with these? Gina, over to you to respond quickly on that.
So I think that's central, and I think that's why we're having this conversation. And I think Catherine's point about where are we looking at transformative adaptation in terms of change to the system as well as addressing inequity versus broader system change. And central to what we're hearing here is around equity and justice, which is not, you might think, something immediately obvious to climate, but we know good development requires us to understand those dynamics. And once we can address some of those, then we can have equitable development. But focusing just on solving interventions for those most vulnerable from external perspective is not going to necessarily have the benefits one might hope long term, have the buy-in. And I love the presentations earlier around strengthened capacity, agency, economic agency, plans, really those bottom-up capacities that we're seeing being built require attention to leadership, where women felt that maybe they didn't have the leadership they'd like. And that's so important that we work on these. But my big takeaway in this field is we've got to work with development practitioners who understand this, who've been doing it for decades, rather than thinking as a climate adaptation expert, I have those skills. So over to many of you who I know have those skills, and we need to collaborate and understand this together.
Thanks, Zena. Excellent points. In the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead with taking some of the questions from the Q&A. I see a couple of questions directed at Kate Gannon from Basin. One question that I'm seeing is on budgeting. Policy and transformative adaptation is quite elaborate. Did you come across any aspects of climate? The question is on budget tagging, Kate. So whether you came across any aspects of climate budget tagging at the national level, and we want to know more about the project. But I'm also adding this question with another question, which is on the publications from your project related to the same topic. So over to you, Kate.
Sure. Thanks so much, Biplav, and thank you so much for the question. This issue of budget tagging is really, really on point because firstly, it's really difficult to get hold of budgets to actually analyze them. So that's one thing in terms of this call for kind of scrutiny of budgets. That's challenging, but particularly because we're talking about mainstreaming of adaptation, we're not looking at kind of individual kind of funded projects and activities. Actually analyzing provision within budgets is really complicated. So one of our kind of clear policy recommendations for kind of moving forwards, bringing accountability into budgeting systems, is to really think at this often Ministry of Finance level within the budgeting templates and formats, think about how we want to be able to track preparedness spelling and put that itself as an agenda for change. So it's really an area that needs a lot more focus, and I think it's actually an area to unlock quite a lot of the potential for both putting it in front of people designing budgets, getting it in their minds, prompting that thought, and also creating space for accountability and assessment of where provision is and isn't flowing afterwards. And just the point on publications, thank you so much for your interest. It's very timely. We will be publishing our first policy brief on Tanzania's national budgeting process on Monday. It'll be on the Grantham Research Institute at LSE's website. We'll be following that up with a Malawi brief later in the year. We'll have a policy brief and report for Malawi, and we've got a couple of journal articles, one on the methodology and one on its application, Tanzania, under review right now, and we'll likely publish those on the Grantham Research Institute website, but also on the CLARE platform, of course, as working papers in the coming weeks. So yeah, but if anybody's interested to know more, we'd be delighted to share and discuss with you. So please do reach out to me on email.
Thanks very much, Kate. We all look forward to reading your publication. I see one question. I'm going back to Gina again. So the question is on let me read the question. So transformative adaptation requires change in local and beyond. Did any of your project engage with alternative financing for transformational adaptation? So the question mentions TUI Pomosa, but I think it can apply to other projects as well. But let me first go ahead with TUI Pomosa colleague, Gina, if you are ready to respond.
So Gilbert is my TUI Pomosa colleague who posed the question. So I think it would be great to hear if anybody else has, I know we're about to wrap up, so if anybody else has experience with alternative financing, but maybe Ono has some other questions because he might want to respond to just in these last few minutes.
Sure, thanks. Thanks for clarifying. That question is indeed coming from your own colleague. I'm looking at if there is any question to Arnaud. I don't see a specific question to Arnaud, but I see one general question on how can small locally led organizations working with rural women and youth move from short-term adaptation activities to transformational adaptation, particularly when funding and institutional support are limited. I think this question can be answered by our panel member who responded to the sustainability question, but I think it's open to everyone indeed. So over to you, colleagues. Who wants to respond to this question?
From my side, I can
Yes, please.
I can propose something from my side and from our experience. To move from this position to another one, I think that what they will look for is behavior change. They need to look beyond what they are doing and trying to put together effort, even if it is for making advocacy to community member, community chief, or responsible in the community. It will help them to get some support. It can be for funding, it can be for material, it can be for support to scale their activity and to grow up. Because it is hard to get funding, and it is also hard to have institution support. So they need to prove that they have ability to do. They need to show that they can change behavior so people can come easily to help them to go beyond what they have ability to do. So that is.
Thanks very much, Arnaud. So we've come to the end of the panel discussion. It was a pleasure moderating this panel discussion with our esteemed panel members. Thanks to Gina, Arnaud, and Kate for taking part in this panel discussion. So let me hand it to Suzanne for closing and also what next is coming. So over to you, Suzanne.
Thanks so much, Biplav. I think no one really wants us to finish, and it's always a shame to bring these things to a close, because I can just feel the richness of the engagement that's been happening in this session, and the lots of applause that's displayed at the bottom of the screen here. Thank you to all of our panelists for really engaging on these grappling with these difficult issues and explaining where your different projects are able to do this. I think the framing presentations were fantastic, really rich discussion in each of them, showing real insights into what these transformative pathways really look like. As we've mentioned, the working paper on transformational adaptation and CLARE will be coming out later this year, and we will definitely share that with this community through the LinkedIn channel. As I mentioned at the very beginning of the session, we have 2 more at least webinars coming up. We may add a few more as we get towards the end of the year. But the next one is in September, the 8th of September, on centering the lived realities of those most impacted by climate change. I think as you've picked up, CLARE is very strong on this aspect and is really trying to bring those real lived experiences to the front, to make sure that we are putting forward adaptation in ways that is going to be suitable and sustainable in local communities. So I think anyone who found today's webinar interesting and engaging will probably enjoy the next topic just as much. And then a slightly different type of webinar we'll be having on the 6th of October is really showcasing how visual storytelling can lead to impact and how we can demonstrate things through more simple methodologies, and how a photo can tell a much longer story, and get people hooked in and understand what's going on in local contexts. So that will be the topic on the 6th of October, and adaptation and action, visual storytelling for impact. Thank you to all of our speakers, all of our panelists, and our moderator Biplav. I've really enjoyed this session. I think this has been a highlight in the webinar series so far. And we really look forward to continuing the engagement with all of you. We will send out the recording and other resources in due course to all of those that were registered. And there will be a link that you can share with friends who you think might have missed this but might enjoy it. All right, we'll see you again soon. Take care, everyone. Bye.
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 Bye.